Well, welcome everyone to today's Talks on Tuesday webinar. My name is Lisa Terry. I'm an early intervention professional development consultant with our Virginia Early Intervention Professional Development team here in Virginia. We also have Seth Buffkin. He is going to provide a lot of the tech and the background support, as well as we're joined with Corey Hill and Dana Childress, who also play a role on our team. And we just want to welcome you to our Talks on Tuesday. This is a two-part webinar series all about reflective supervision, which I'm super excited about because sometimes I feel like reflective supervision, people aren't really sure what it is. They don't really know what it looks like or really how it impacts families. And so Jess Taylor Pickford, she's our presenter today, and she's going to share a lot of really good, insightful information about that. So I am going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Jess, and then if you want to give a little bit more background and get started.
Great. So thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm happy to be sharing this information with you. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Jess Taylor Pickford. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I actually provide reflective supervision to groups and individuals. And really my journey with reflective supervision started out as being a recipient of reflective supervision within the context of my clinical work with young children. And as I received my infant mental health endorsement, I was able to provide reflective supervision, though those things do not have to be connected together, and have had the opportunity to be able to supervise groups and individuals across a variety of settings in their work. And even more recently, I have taken on the role of endorsement coordinator here in North Carolina, which is where I'm currently located. Lisa knows this, that I lived in Virginia maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And really work has primarily been about rolling out the infant mental health endorsement system, which has reflective supervision as part of the requirements. And so working with sectors of the early childhood workforce to be thinking about how they want to start building out that reflective capacity within the context of their agencies. So I come to you with all of those different hats that I've worn over the past few years. And I also share all of that with you to say that reflective supervision is a journey. And it takes time to both understand it and hone those skills and then figure out how to support others. And so it's definitely been a journey for me. So I always like to share that with folks when I talk with them about reflective supervision. So for today, I like to remind folks that we get out of training these days what we put in. I know there's a ton of virtual options available in terms of training right now. And so I would really encourage you today to use the chat features, use the handout attached to this training to really be following along so that you get the most out of our time together. But here's where we're going to begin. We're going to first begin talking about reflective capacity. We have to start by naming what it is we're hoping for within the provision of reflective supervision and for folks more generally. So reflective capacity is the ability to understand, interpret, make meaning of behavior, and this could be our behavior or the behavior of another person, by tuning into the possible thoughts, feelings, and motivations happening behind what we see, right? So I'm a big fan of Mona Delahook's work, Beyond Behaviors, and I love her metaphor of the iceberg. And so really reflective capacity is about being able to take a deep dive about what's happening underneath the surface. And that, again, could be thoughts, feelings, motivations that are driving what we can see above, which is the behavior. So I want you to be picturing an iceberg here. Of course, there are some neurobiological aspects to this. And this reflective capacity, the other thing I like to remind folks is that it can be challenged in certain situations. Probably the biggest impediment to being able to take the perspective of another is being in a situation of stress and fear. and frustration and overwhelm, right? All of those pieces make it really hard to step into the shoes of another person. And so even if we have had really solid development of reflective capacity over the years, it gets challenged in certain moments with certain situations. And so we need that support in continuing to practice reflective capacity within the context of reflective supervision. So how is reflective capacity developed? First, we have to think that reflective capacity takes root in those early relationships. In the context of those serve and return interactions, right? So what I'm picturing here is baby presents a cue to a caregiver, and then caregiver responds in turn. That's what I'm thinking of, that kind of dynamic back and forth interactions. And it's through these repeated interactions with warm, consistent, attuned caregivers that we begin to understand who we are. So we start being more intentional about our behavior. And they also are starting to give us clues about our emotional state, right? So when you have a baby that's crying, oh, you're so sad, you're so scared, you're so hungry. And little ones begin to internalize that. And these little ones begin to understand important others. And so that's when the roots of reflective capacity take hold in these earliest interactions, and they are strengthened across the lifespan in healthy and supportive relationships that help us feel understood, right? And so many of you are providing services directly to young children and their families. And so I want you to take a moment to reflect on, this is the type of interaction that we're trying to foster within the context of those services. There is some research to suggest that parental reflective capacity, and in the research, it's often called mentalization. So parental capacity for mentalization, to think through what's happening for their young child, is one of the key predictors of healthy attachment. It's not any specific parenting practice. It's this capacity for a parent or caregiver to think about how their baby is experiencing the world and their relationship, right? So we want to foster this between parents and young children. Before we dive into thinking about reflective supervision, I have a little poll for you. Thank you for launching that, Seth. If you could tell me how much you know about reflective supervision, could you fit it on a stamp, a postcard, a letter, or could you write a book? Okay, we've got a lot of responses coming in quickly. And Seth, you'll have to give me an update when you see that we're getting pretty close. There we are, 54 of 69, pretty close. Oh, this is great information. Thank you so much for sharing. So we've got folks who are feeling like this is their first dip into the water of reflective supervision. We've got folks who feel like they've been exposed a little bit to what reflective supervision is. They could fit some of that on a postcard. And then a few more folks, kind of evenly spread, that feel like they could actually really dive in and write a letter about it. Let me share the results here. Great. Okay. Close that out for just a second. All right, so we talked about what is this magic thing, reflective capacity, that we want to nurture within the context of services to young children and their families, but we need to practice that as professionals, right? We need to practice it so that we can bring it to the parents, the caregivers that we are working with, so that they can practice it and build it within the context of their relationships with young children. And again, we talked about how it gets challenged in times of stress, so that's something to keep in mind, and that we can build this capacity. So we do that within the context of reflective supervision. So reflective supervision, I'm going to give you a few quotes here, is a collaborative relationship for professional growth that improves program quality and practice by cherishing strengths and partnering around vulnerabilities to generate growth. And you can start to see some of the parallels between maybe some of the services that you're bringing to young children and families where we cherish strengths and partner around vulnerabilities to scaffold development. And we do the same in reflective supervision. Reflective supervision is also a place to understand the meaning of your work with a family and the meaning and impact of your relationship with that family, right? So this is kind of where we start to see that mutually created relationship of reflective supervision supports the kind of high quality infant and early childhood mental health services that we're looking for, right? So whether your program is primarily focused on infant mental health and social emotional development, or that's an aspect of your program, being able to think about how these things relate. So I'm going to give you a little bit of research because I think that that's an important thing too to keep in mind, that reflective supervision in the research shows us that folks who receive reflective supervision feel more effective in their ability to assess, focus, right, when you're getting inundated with information, and respond to the families that they're working with. They feel more equipped to address personal bias. They have a growing ability to shift perspectives, set boundaries, and improve capacity to slow down, observe, and listen, and that they actually feel really affirmed and supported in the difficult work they're doing with young children and their families. So I'm going to give you just a moment here in the chat to think about having staff who feel these things, how that would improve program quality. One of the things that it always brings up for me is this idea of burnout. Reflective supervision can really help folks feel supported in the work that they're doing. And so we have to wonder if that is going to transition into retention. And I will tell you an anecdotal story about that. I was talking with someone within my work here in North Carolina. She is a provider of reflective supervision in the Head Start, Early Head Start program. And that program has really high turnover typically in early care and education. And they started seeing that as she was providing reflective supervision to the teachers, someone said something that she didn't even notice. Hey, your teachers are staying longer. The teachers that you're actually giving space to this, they're sticking with the program. Yeah. So I'm just going to look here in the chat. Ways that you can think that having these pieces would support your programs. Yeah, thank you, Dana. It could help practitioners who are really struggling with feeling effective in their work. It gives a sense of confidence and better capacity to problem solve. And then it would foster better teamwork, right? Because we're not only strengthening the working relationships with families, but we're hopefully strengthening the team dynamic, right? Yeah. Yes. Thank you. It definitely, I feel like, reduces burnout. I'm going to look for some data because I do think there is some new research to suggest this piece around burnout with more concrete data. Yeah. The other thing, Lisa, you mentioned that I love to hear is that it helps people feel more connected and heard in the work that they're doing. They don't have to feel alone out there, which is a big problem, I think, especially when you're doing home-based services and kind of traveling out into the community, or if you're doing those visits in a virtual landscape and maybe not in an office setting, it can feel really isolating. I remember that when doing in-home services and then working virtually primarily now. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. All right, so first, we can't start talking about reflective supervision without thinking about other types of supervision. And I want you to hold in mind that you may be a supervisor or you may be in a program that your supervisor is holding dual roles, right? So the first thing, your supervisor might be tasked with providing, well, my slides skip forward too much, but we're just going to talk through it. So you might be tasked with providing administrative supervision. So think through administrative supervision as looking like doing paperwork, writing performance evaluations, providing some training and guidance on program policies and procedures, And so a lot of times folks who are providing supervision are actually tasked with doing an administrative piece as well. Clinical supervision, and this is also on your handout for the training, so you might be referring to that there since my slide skipped. Clinical supervision looks a lot like providing evaluations of progress, a family's progress to goals, reviewing goals on the IFSP, looking at specific interventions, and that the overall tenor of clinical supervision is to teach or to give guidance, right? So I give language to all of that now to think about how reflective supervision might be unique, also holding in mind that there are going to be times when you are providing some reflective space and also tasked with being the person who needs to do a performance eval and teach people how to do paperwork. And so juggling can feel a little bit challenging. So one of the first features of reflective supervision that feels unique is this emphasis on feelings. Reflective supervision really is meant to provide a place where we can talk about feelings that arise within the context of our work. And so we're going to start here with doing a bit of a guided meditation. So take just a moment to settle into your seat. I know that can be a bit challenging depending on how you're connecting today. So if you're able, take a few deep breaths. You might even close your eyes. And I want you to imagine that you see a family that is causing you some frustration, and you see their name pop up on your calendar for later in the day. Chances are you're connecting with them virtually, and so that meeting time is getting a bit closer and a bit closer as the day progresses. And now it's time to log on. And I want you to take a quick moment to scan what's happening in your body from head to toe. You can start with your shoulders, your arms, and your belly, making note of any sensations that are coming up for you. What's happening in your stomach and with your heart? With your legs and calves and feet, just taking note of any sensations you feel, thinking about this family in which you're having a really difficult time. And when you're ready, you can join me back. And I'd like for you to share with me how thinking about a family that you're struggling with or having a difficult time with, what sensations did that bring up for you? I know for me, I tend to get a little bit of like a racing heart or like a tight tummy. Those are my cues that I'm feeling a lot of discomfort in the work. A clenched jaw. Yes, absolutely. We might get that gritted teeth. It just feels tight. Sometimes I can even feel that down in my neck. Yeah, that feeling of anxiety, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's sweaty palms or a racing heart. We might have migraines that intensify, absolutely. And achy, tight shoulders, right. I kind of notice sometimes I get up sitting like this and I'm like, oh, wait a second. Why am I doing that? Kind of have to scan. Right. So I think the thing that I'm hoping to illustrate here is that feelings impact us in so many ways. It impacts our greetings, posture, the movements that we make. It impacts facial expressions, our capacity to have eye contact. I'll share, I was in a really big meeting the other day presenting, and I remember I was looking like off or to the side so much because I was feeling really nervous in that moment. And so I was kind of trying to turn away. It definitely impacts our verbal responses. So pacing and tone of voice and pauses. There's actually some science behind when we're feeling stressed out. Our vocal cords constrict a little bit. So sometimes we can sound a bit more shrill. And that oftentimes, because so much of our communication is nonverbal, I think it's like 80%, it can really give people this overall experience of like, this person does not like being with me, right? So our feelings really do impact our body posture and impact us in all these ways. And so it really is important, I think, as practitioners to be aware of them and have a space to process them in order to better manage some of these ways that physiologically we demonstrate our feelings anyways. So the other thing I want to impress upon folks is that feelings can also be a really important source of data within the work that we're doing. I think as professionals, we really put this high value on neutrality, and neutrality means that we're being professionals. But when we really do take a look at the feelings that we're having within the work, they can become really valuable information. I'm going to share a story with you about me as a new practitioner. I was working within a family who had a kiddo that was in their home because of foster care, and this baby had colic. And this foster mother was so overwhelmed and exhausted and feeling so ineffective, even though she had parented other children in the past. She just felt like this colic was making her so anxious. And we were trying everything, I think, as in our work together about how to help this baby calm and settle and feel better. And I remember I would go to reflective supervision, and when I talked about this family, I could literally feel that anxiety. But I didn't yet have words or understanding to know that that was an important source of data for me until my reflective supervisor pointed it out. She's like, you seem very anxious when you talk about this family. You feel like very ineffective in all of these interventions that you're trying with this poor baby and foster mother that are trying to figure out how to be with one another. And in her naming that, it helped me recognize that that's actually how this foster mom was feeling. And instead of coming at it with all of these different solutions and try this and try that and do this and do that, really what I could do in that instance is really just be there for this foster mother and hold and support her and acknowledge how difficult and anxious she was feeling about how this baby was doing with her. And it really did, in a sense, deepen our relationship. But that all came out of having an awareness and placing value on how I was feeling about having to show up to this visit and come back week after week without a lot of resolution or progress. Yeah. So one of the things I think we should take a moment to acknowledge here is that there's a lot of barriers to talking about feelings, especially within a program where maybe you have a supervisor who's also an administrative supervisor. But what barriers do you imagine folks might have, or what barriers do you have in talking about feelings in supervisory sessions? And you can feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat. I can share with myself, I was not used to having to talk about feelings until I started reflective supervision. And so it was really a learning process. Yeah. So someone mentioned it can be really scary because you don't necessarily know if those feelings are going to be held against you, right? So if you're a practitioner who's feeling really ineffective in the work, that's kind of a scary thing to admit to your supervisor who's also doing a performance evaluation for you, right? Yeah. Yeah, and looking like you're not managing yourself professionally if you're having these feelings of overwhelm or you're feeling negatively about a family. Absolutely. Yeah. That you might add stress to your supervisor as well. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I know supervisors have a lot on their plate. And so if they're feeling like they have to worry about you as well, it can be hard to share your feelings with them. You don't want to stress them out. Yeah. I think Melinda, I love this point that depending on personality, temperament, and I would also say early experiences with how we're sort of socialized to talk about feelings or not talk about feelings or not talk about certain feelings, that some people just kind of have these ideas about, is it okay? Is it safe to talk about when I'm angry? Is it okay to talk about when I'm feeling overwhelmed, right? And everyone comes to that with different life experiences. And so that plays into their comfort level. Yeah. Yes, Jaylene, this is a really lovely point. So if you share your feelings, sometimes there's that fear that maybe it's going to be misconstrued, right? Like we can feel really angry about how things are going with a family, feel really frustrated. It's like they're not doing this, X, Y, and Z thing that I'm working so hard with them on, and we know it's going to benefit this young child. And sometimes it feels really scary to admit, like, I'm frustrated about this. And we don't want people to misunderstand that that means we don't enjoy our work, or we don't want them to misunderstand that we don't really see value in the things that we're doing. So we kind of have to figure out how to communicate that, but it can feel scary at first. You guys did a wonderful job on mentioning some of those. But I love this piece about holding in mind that everyone's going to have a different perspective about whether or not it's safe to talk about feelings or what feelings. And so knowing that for yourself and knowing that for your supervisees is a really important piece as you start dipping your toe into the water of talking about feelings. The next unique feature of reflective supervision is about the parallel process. I hope this is a familiar term to you all, but if it's not, parallel process really is just talking about the influence and impact of relationships on relationships. And I like to think about this on a continuum. Here's my graphic. And so we have the baby in the center, and then we have the caregiver, right? And so we think about, when we talked about how we want to bring reflective capacity down to impact baby's development, that's a key example of parallel process. We practice reflective supervision. We practice supporting direct service staff in bringing that to the kids and families that they're working with. And then hopefully we have this baby who is beginning to plant the seeds of reflective capacity as they develop. Another great example of parallel process really is this piece around the baby that I worked with colic. So the feelings, I think, in that situation were carried up through the parallel process. We had a baby that was very unsettled and really, really struggling with any type of co-regulation. And then we had a foster mom who was really, really unsettled and very, very anxious. And then we had me, a new professional, feeling very confused about what my role is and very ineffective in my work, bringing that to supervision. And so that's a key example of the parallel process. So I want you to be thinking about how this process is really active and dynamic. It's bi-directional, which means it goes both up and down. But it also really gives us an intentional way of being in relationships as an avenue for change. So the thing I like to think of is my supervisor, in talking about that particular case, could have gotten all anxious with me and said, like, have you tried? Have you thought about? Have you considered? Have you given her? But instead of doing that and perpetuating what was already happening within the parallel process, she slowed me down. Way down, helped name what I was feeling, helped me feel supported in the work I was doing. And I was then able to bring that back to this mom and this baby, right? So it really does. It's not a static process. It offers us a way to think through how we want to be in the work in order to create change. So we're going to do a little activity. Give me a couple of things here in the chat. What do we want for all babies and toddlers? You can list one quality. Safety. Yep. So let's start with safety. So if we want babies and toddlers to feel safe with their caregivers, it can be really helpful for their caregivers to be predictable, right? And consistent. And be very transparent about what's coming, right? Especially with toddlers, what's coming next, and what expectations we have of them. And so when we think about that, we want workers to be predictable and consistent and transparent about the expectations of the program. And as supervisors, we need the same, right? We need supervisors who are transparent, predictable, consistent, that help nurture that sense of safety and expectation. Right? I love this. We want secure attachment. So to me, secure attachment for babies really looks at, they want to feel effective in their interactions with other people, and they want to know what to expect from others, and that they feel like others can be trustworthy, and that others are going to respond to them in ways that make sense. And so we can kind of think about that. We want parents to feel effective in caring for their young child, even though sometimes it is so hard and confusing. And we want staff to feel effective in the work that they're doing because they've received the training that they need and they've received the guidance and support that they need, to feel like they have some scaffolding about kind of what their expectations are for their program, right? Yeah. So I hope that gives you some ideas about how we are in relationships with supervisees, pulls down into how supervisees are with children and families. And that's what we're hoping for. And we do that within the context of parallel process. Okay. So I'm going to read a quick quote to you because I think this really does illustrate parallel process well. And this is from a supervisee. So reflective supervision gives me the opportunity to become a better practitioner and a better communicator. It gives me the opportunity to build my own reflective capacity. And again, we talked about that being one of the keys in reflective supervision, and responsiveness. Skills that have been shown to contribute to healthy communication and emotional development in children, and skills I hope their parents develop, right? So I hope you're starting to see these really concrete ways in which reflective supervision can impact the work with young children and families. So the next thing that is sort of unique about reflective supervision, and quite honestly, one of the things I struggle with the most about reflective supervision, if I'm being completely transparent, is there's a greater emphasis in reflective supervision on listening and waiting. That we really want supervisees to be able to fully express their thoughts and feelings about the work that they're doing prior to jumping in and providing solutions. So the Alliance for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health and Aim High Tennessee, which is the Infant Mental Health Association in Tennessee, created this great four series of videos that they talk about listening, observing, describing, and then responding, right? These four little words. And I think that we want to think about doing those things in that order. And oftentimes we are in a place where we just want to respond. But the more we can listen and observe and describe what's happening, and then respond, it puts this emphasis on not just having a one-size-fits-all solution. And it also demonstrates in a nonverbal way that we are going to be there to be a calm, supportive presence and be available to hear and receive whatever families or supervisees are bringing to us within the context of the work. So it kind of in that way helps us reprioritize fixing and doing. And we want to really prioritize being with and listening as part of the intervention. The other piece that's unique about reflective supervision is this trust in the process. So, right, that when we do listen and wait, and really fully articulate, let folks fully articulate multiple perspectives or the complexity of the problem or how they're feeling about things, that it's through that process that more organic solutions or ways to respond will start coming to the surface. That's the best metaphor I can give for this. It's like, you kind of sit with all this murkiness for a little while, and then all of a sudden it's like, something bubbles up and you're like, oh, that's actually a really great way to proceed here. Or, oh, I never thought of it that way. It just kind of bubbles to the surface in a way that it might not be able to if, as a supervisor or as a practitioner, we're rushing in and saying, have you tried this, or have you read this, or this is the procedure and this is how we have to do things, right? So we miss all those little bubbles that can really move treatment or move supervision forward. But we always go back to this idea, and I mentioned here in the beginning, this is one of the most challenging aspects for me. What challenges do you imagine or someone would experience, or what challenges do you experience when you just have to listen and wait or trust the process? I'm going to look here in the chat. Oh. We ended up a little farther forward than that, but that is okay. So I'll share with you one of my biggest challenges. And I think about this metaphor of sitting on my hands. So I tend to be a little bit more of a problem solver and kind of type A. So I like to know the answer to things. But I literally have to sit on my hands knowing that this is important to listen and wait. And that we really feel, so Jenny mentioned, we really feel called to want to help right away. Absolutely. I think this is an important thing to mention, that oftentimes when you are working with kids and families, you came to that because you wanted to be a helper and you wanted to be supportive. And so to have to slow down and just listen without jumping in is really, really a challenge to this. Like, am I helping? Is this how I'm supposed to be helping? Is it helpful just to sit here and listen, or should I be offering something? It's kind of a challenge to that schema of being a helper. Yeah. Yes. So someone mentioned here up above, it's hard not to jump right in, especially when something either resonates with you, or it's like, to you from the outside looking in, the solution is so clear, right? Like, okay, we can kind of see what's happening. And the person we're working with is in it. So it's harder for them to see sort of outside, that perspective. And so it's so hard when you're kind of observing this person in their process, and we want to be able to support them in moving forward, but they're just not quite there yet. And we have to have confidence that they will get there. And oftentimes they will get there on their own in a way that makes most sense to them. And so it's hard not to kind of jump in and be like, well, have you considered? Yes, so Melinda mentioned listening to understand rather than listening to respond. Yes, that's beautiful. I've never heard that before, but I'm so glad that you shared it with us, Melinda, because I think that is a great way to frame both of these pieces, is that we really should be sitting with folks and listening to more deeply understand them versus listening to automatically be able to form a response or fix a problem, right? So this next piece that's sort of unique about reflective supervision is that we are holding space, right? So I like to think about this is that, sometimes reflective supervision is going to create a pathway forward, and we might walk away from a reflective supervision session and really feel like we've got some concrete, like, next steps, things we want to think about or things we want to try. Sometimes we walk away from reflective supervision feeling like, okay, I'm better grounded in knowing that my calm presence is going to be an impact on this caregiver and child. And so I don't have to do as much as I think I need to do, right? So we kind of shift our energy around the interaction, and that's our next step. But oftentimes there's no solution to what's happening, right? No shift in energy is available to us. No fix-its, no try this, try that, no different ways of being. And we just have to sit and hold some space. A really great example of this is if there's grief. Typically, there's not a lot to be done about that, except to know that if we are going to sit with someone in their difficulty or in their struggle, that it really is nourishing and supportive to be held in the mind of another when we're going through something difficult, right? And I think parents and caregivers feel that too if you're working with them directly, right? Sometimes they're encountering these really, really difficult situations in which we can't shift or we can't change things, but we can be someone who is available to listen and support and hold them in that process that they're going through, right? And as supervisees, we also need that too. So I was joking with a supervisee, was it last week? I think it was last week. She kind of came and had really big feelings within our session. And she goes, Jess, I feel so terrible that like I'm unloading all of this on you, was the terminology that she used. And I said, that's okay, because I actually have my own reflective supervision later. So we just kind of thought about how I could be there to support her, and then I could seek my own reflective supervision if I was feeling unsteady after our session, so that I had a reflective supervision provider who could hold some space for me if I needed it after that session. And I did, and it was great. So the next piece that I think this leads us to, if we're looking to really more unique and organic solutions that take into account multiple perspectives and what providers are bringing to the work, that there's a greater emphasis in reflective supervision on who we are and what we bring to the relationships in our work. And so whether that be experiences, identities, beliefs, I think the list can go on and on. We have to stop and recognize that all of those things create a lens by which we are sometimes viewing interactions, viewing our work, viewing relationships with kids and families. And so reflective supervision offers some time and space for folks to be able to talk about that and note that and pay attention to that rather than just, stay kind of within their own identity and experience. So we're going to do a bit of an activity, and I want to just front load this activity that we're going to be quiet for about 2 to 3 minutes here. And sometimes within these short trainings, it feels really strange not to be filling the space with lots of didactic information and goodies that you're going to be able to kind of take back with you. But really, this exercise is meant to help us slow down and think about, and this can be at any level that you want, what are some of the experiences and qualities that you bring with you into the work? So an example that I might give you is that, I was the first generation, my sister and I, to finish college. And so education just had like a huge sort of emphasis as I was growing up. Like there was no question that was going to be what we were going to do. And, that was going to be valued. And so sometimes for me as a provider, I move into this, I call it teaching mode. So sometimes as a provider, I kind of move into this teaching mode, or I have become really interested in infant mental health endorsement, right? That's a certification, because that's sort of a value that I bring to the work. And it's not a bad thing, but it's something that I have to be aware of and be mindful of as I'm engaging in reflective supervision with others. So that's my example, but we're going to sit quietly for just a couple of minutes here. You have 2 choices for how you want to engage in this. First is you might use the handout that was provided to you and be able to write that down. The second is you could type a couple of things in the chat. If you want to contribute something but you do not want someone to know it's coming from you, you can message me directly, right? Because I know we're kind of a larger training today. So you could message me directly and then we'll have a bit of a conversation here about it. Okay, so I'm going to set my timer. Feel free to get started. So we're just about a minute and a half in. I'm going to encourage you to keep writing. If you have something that you'd like to go ahead and share in the chat, you might go ahead and start typing it there. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing. Keep writing if you need to, but right. So Melinda, thank you so much for sharing this. I grew up in a family that avoided conflict and sharing feelings at all, right? And so it can be really, really challenging in those situations when we sort of just haven't had the experience of sharing feelings. Is that safe? Being vulnerable, is that safe? And then to come into a situation like reflective supervision, where supervisors might be asking you about sharing those feelings and expecting you to be vulnerable. And that can be really, really challenging. Absolutely. Yeah. So Lisa mentioned having her own children. Certainly that is a game changer. I recognize that I did infant mental health work prior to having kids and then had my own kids. And sometimes I reflect back to the things that I was doing or saying or thinking about, or the ways I was doing things pre-kids. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I would have recommended that in the same way that I would do it now. Absolutely. Yeah. So here's this other piece. So knowing parents are in the mental health field, so knowing you're going to grow up knowing about mental illness. And sometimes we have to remember that when we're walking in with families, they might not have the same level of knowledge or even comfort in talking about mental illness. And so that's a perspective that we might bring based on our own experiences for sure. Absolutely. You guys are really providing so many wonderful examples. I'm so thankful. Yep. And other examples about sort of expectations about how people treat you. One of the things around manners and politeness is something that comes up for me when I see that piece is, sort of we have this certain expectation about what rude behavior is, or, how people should be treating other people. And then when we encounter something different with clients or families or supervisees, that can feel so hard, right? Because we have that initial sort of visceral reaction. right? Yep. So we had some messages about learning to be independent and resilient. That if that's a value that we have in our own life, like, you just kind of like, I think someone said this to me the other day, and I'd never heard this saying before, like, suck it up, buttercup, you can do it. That sort of grit and resilience inherent in that, that's not the way everyone approaches problem solving. And so sometimes when people are saying, hey, wait, like, I can't do this is not something I really want to take on right now, or I'm feeling super overwhelmed by X, Y, and Z. If we have that sort of leading foot of like, you need to be independent, you need to be resilient, that can feel like a real mismatch. Absolutely. So the other thing that's interesting to mention in the context of planning this training, we talked about the use of silence within this activity as like, should we do it? Should we not do it? Are people going to be comfortable with the use of silence for an activity? And I'll share, so reflective supervision, especially around this process of listening and waiting, oftentimes uses silence as an intervention or as a tool a bit more. And so, I even think back about, what was your comfort level and what was my comfort level with giving you a couple minutes to just be quiet within the context of a training? Did it bubble up some discomfort? That's a moment that I have sometimes in reflective supervision, like it bubbles up. Should I fill the space? Do I need to say something? Do I need to pivot the group? And so, I just remember, because it's like, I go back to that teaching mode and I'm like, well, maybe I should be giving information. And so that's kind of what bubbles up for me around use of silence. Did anyone else have any strong reactions to having to sit still and be quiet for a couple of moments and just reflect? I know I sometimes do. So I hope this exercise was helpful. Obviously, there are a myriad of ways that our experiences, our identities come with us into our professional work. And the more we can be aware of that, and when it happens, the better equipped we are to think through how we want to respond to that. Maybe it is perfectly appropriate, that our own experience is coming to play within the context of the work that we're doing. And maybe we even move through disclosing some of that to a supervisee, or maybe we disclose some of that to a family that we're working with, but we do that in a way that resonates with what they need from us, right? And so we're better able to sort of think through that instead of just blurting out and disclosing things. We're also better able to think about any bias, unconscious bias that comes up for us, and monitor how that's impacting what we're providing. But overall, the thing I want to impress upon you is that neutrality is really an impossible standard. I think we talked about that a bit earlier. Neutrality and only having positive feelings about the work that you're doing just is probably not really going to be possible. It's important to acknowledge that we are sort of judgmental and we have inherent bias. And the more we are aware of it, the less likely it is that we will act on it in a way that damages a relationship or disrupts services or anything like that. And that reflective supervision becomes a place where we can really dive in and explore some of those things. Of course, it can feel a little bit scary, particularly if, depending on the relationship that you have with your supervisor, or how long you've been doing the work, or what your comfort level is with vulnerability. But that reflective supervision can offer us some space to do that. So this very last piece that I think sort of piggybacks on all that we've been sort of talking about and pulling threads to is that reflective supervision more recently has had a lot of emphasis on making sure that there's room for discussion about equity and diversity, and that we really have to honor some of these non-dominant ways of knowing, ways of being, so that we can engage in more culturally responsive, diversity-informed services with young children and their families, right? Because we're honoring the perspectives that they bring and the experiences that families bring, and we're honoring the perspectives and experiences and identities of the provider as well, and seeing how those things can work together. So at this point, we have about 5 minutes for questions. Before that, I'm going to pass, you can type your questions in the chat and we'll be monitoring that, but Lisa's going to talk to us about CEUs and next steps.
Thanks, Jess. So after this, this presentation, you all actually right now, you should have an email with the link to the survey. So go ahead and complete that. Once you do complete it, a certificate will automatically populate. You want to download that and save that to your desktop. So you will get 1 hour of professional development. And also, because you registered today, you are automatically registered for our next Talks on Tuesday webinar, where Jess is really going to talk about building that relationship for reflection. And so that is on March 1st from 12 to 1 Eastern Standard Time. And Jess, I do appreciate the silence that you made us do. It's always good practicing being uncomfortable in my own silence. So I do appreciate it. And yes, the recording will be accessible probably within a couple days. It'll be added to our YouTube page. So make sure you guys are also following our VEIPD YouTube page to get access to the recording. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions for Jess, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Jess, for presenting on this much needed topic.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate you all hosting me. And I really am looking forward to that March session, because we talked about all these great things that we want to do in reflective supervision, but the very first thing we have to do is build the relationship to be able to do these things. So make sure you catch us for part 2. And we can talk about building that relationship. Thank you, everyone. I see lots of great feedback in the chat. That's so kind, and a lot of familiar names. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to stay for just an extra minute or two, just in case there is questions that start to pop up. And also know I'm happy to connect with you around some of those our next session.